And Guru gave all of us such a wonderful experience of coming to know God. He gave us all the ingredients, all the methods, all the chances, everything in which to grow in this knowledge and love and experience of the divine. And he would then add that certain sort of magic dust on top. Because in those days he was very much, we were such a small group of maybe 5 or 6 of us, and he'd teach us in the temple yoga. And so after having a lovely meal, we'd then light the lamps and he would chant, and then one by one give us personal instruction, which was, I mean, I've had some of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had with Guru sitting cross-legged in front of me, knees touching knees, and just the whole universe would open up. I mean, so beautiful. And he'd say, okay, that's once. Never again. Now you do it yourself.
So it wasn't about sort of telling you stuff, but actually giving you an experience of the divine.
He would hold your forehead,
Oh, right.
or touch very lightly, and say, what do you see? What do you see? You would enter this rapport. His eyes were closed, my eyes were closed. Go further, go to the right. What do you see? Go up, go up, go up. Further, further, further. And he was in there with you, taking you to that point where it was just a million suns just bursting in your head. So beautiful, so beautiful. But he would be very measured and say, okay, now you see what you're capable of. Now you do it. And then 45, 50 years later, still trying. I've had grace in dribs and drabs. It's so lovely. But he really knew how far to take you and where to stop. He was so concerned all the way through his life here not to make people dependent on him, which is why Skanda is so successful, because with Guru's demise, there wasn't barely a ripple. It's carried on so beautifully, so beautiful, so well trained. Everybody was really encouraged not to be Guru dependent, but to be divine dependent. He was just, what did he call himself? A traffic cop was one of his favorite expressions. I'm just leading you all up that way. Don't stop at me. Anyway, so more early days stories, let's think. Well, perhaps I can talk a little bit about, which we touched on, the arrival of Mother, because that was quite a drama in Guru's life, and initially very confusing. Really out of the blue, quite often I would take my mattress and drag it from my little room, the other side of the shrine, across the passage, and put it down near Guru's bed. He had a lovely shrine on the other side of his bed, and I'd always sit with him in the evenings and chant. I'd often fall asleep. I was so tired by then. I mean, it was way past midnight when Guru would start chanting. So occasionally I'd get an elbow in my ribs, because when you fall asleep and you're trying to take part in the chanting, it's very annoying for the person chanting. When your chant starts to get slower and slower, and you're out of rhythm and out of time, and you're in the wrong place. So I get this elbow in my ribs. Either stay awake or shut up, but don't chant out of time. Oh, too sweet. So then I collapsed onto my mattress, and I remember then one morning, well, actually it was not even morning, it was still pitch dark, and a pillow flying across the room, and Guru saying something in quite fruity language, more or less, who on earth do you think you are, and who gave you permission to come to disturb my sleep? And another pillow would fly, and there was nobody in the room as far as I could see, just his shrine with lots of lamps. And in the morning, Guru said, did you see that creature? And I said, no, Guru. What? Oh, I don't know, some demonic influence, or I don't know. Anyway, don't worry, I fought it off. Next night, same story. This went on for quite a while. The Guru was clearly getting quite stressed that whoever was visiting him wasn't getting the message and wasn't obeying the rather firm and slightly fruity language. I won't put on record quite what he said because it's not really printable. Guru was a master of fruity comments, has to be said. Things developed anyway, and then one day, from being a figure, he would describe what was happening, and there's a lot of hair and bulging eyes and sort of blood and weapons and goodness knows what, and without being given the okay to appear, this creature kept coming back, and he knew it was a female form. I think he rather feared it might have been half demonic, half divine, but he wasn't sure, and Guru wasn't one to take chances. He was highly skeptical. He encouraged all of us to be very skeptical. He said, God has given you all intelligence, rationality, the power to discriminate. Jolly well use it. Don't accept anything at face value. And this is clearly what Guru was doing for this period of time. And then on one occasion, as he told me, very shortly afterwards, this figure looked like a hag, he said, awful, ghastly figure with hair all over the place, suddenly transformed into the most beautiful vision of a lovely girl. And Guru realized that it was actually the Divine Mother that he'd been shouting at and screaming at and resisting and denying her presence. And she clearly was not taking no for an answer. He wasn't taking her presence for granted. And it was a sort of battle of will, I think. But she, in the end, she won and he succumbed. And she used to put her knee in his back, into his backbone, I remember him describing it, and giving him the most incredible amount of energy. And she would then fragment his body into 1,000 pieces and just scatter it into the sun. So he was completely bodiless. And then when she was ready, in her good time, with a chuckle, she'd then reassemble it, thankfully all the bits in the right places, and he'd be given his body back again. I mean, you can imagine me sleeping there, bringing him his coffee in the morning, and he'd tell me exactly what had been happening to him during the night. I mean, it was quite extraordinary. Night after night after night.
For how long?
Oh, months. Months, I mean, yeah. And she would give him so much energy and shakti that the whole bed would shake, his body would be leaping off. I mean, he would leave the mattress. Sometimes it sounded like he wasn't breathing at all, which would concern me. It was all right while he was shaking. I wouldn't worry too much, but then suddenly you'd hear there was no breathing at all. Minutes would pass. And then I'd panic. You have to forget that I was very young and very inexperienced when it came to this kind of personal image. I'd had wonderful experiences of a sort of universal divinity, light and energy and power and colour and all that, but not a personal image of the divine, who could change from beauty to hideous and to everything in between so quickly. That to me didn't sound like fun, I have to say, and so I was worried and felt I had to sort of slightly protect Guru from what was going on, although I didn't quite know how to, but I was concerned, and I thought it wasn't good for his heart. I mean, don't forget, Guru had not long before quite a powerful heart attack. Or was it shortly after? Gosh, I can't quite remember, but fairly close to that period. And so I was concerned for his heart and what that would do to his system, just the amount of jolting. It was a bit like electric shocks going into his body. It would be very violent. I'm not sure it was that pleasant, but he accepted it. And around that time, this beautiful murti was then offered by, I think it was Shiv, can't quite remember, who was embraced then with open arms, no question of being sent to a river for purification. This murti, okay, a lot of haldi and a lot of purifying was done, but it wasn't dismissed. And that then began these lovely full moon pujas. So Mother had come to stay. And Subramanium was slowly, you could tell from his discourses in that period, was slowly being, I don't know, not put aside, but just sort of made way for, and Mother would then become more and more the central figure. And in fact, she started to run Skanda Vale. He would bounce then ideas off her, concepts, thoughts. If you ask Guru a question, even then he'd say, well, give me a minute and I'll think about it. And he was just reflecting the idea to Mother. And an answer would come very quickly, very quickly.
Had he done that with Lord Murugan?
He had, but he hadn't, yes, no, he had, but somehow it was, well, it appeared to us to be more Guru coming up with the answers. With Mother, it was really a takeover. It just seemed to be, she was really settling here, like a mother chicken. You know, she was sort of getting her feathers and wings out and putting everybody underneath and taking care of. Murugan, one never had quite the feeling. I mean, he was definitely, I mean, it was like the Skanda Vale, the Vale of Skanda. And the whole valley has that shape of a spear. But it was more seen as his energy and his sort of power and his battle, and we were fighting the various problems locally with farmers and difficult rapport with neighbours and things. And with Mother, it was like we disappeared under someone's great duvet. it was a very different atmosphere. We all became. I can see it in the bhajans I used to sing. It was all Subramanium, and it was almost verging on a battle cry sometimes, those Subramanium bhajans. And then with the Mother bhajans came a sweetness and a softness, or more of a sweetness. Not that the word sweet bhajans sung, plenty of Krishna, lovely Krishna bhajans and things, but there was just we all felt it. Because it was a very male community then. There was a sisterhood, but it was a bit of a sort of added on, a bolted on thing. And so with Mother, the female principle, the whole female power came. It brought things back into balance, actually. Really nice, really nice. Now you have both. You see, you have Subramanium down there, you have Mother up here, and Vishnu in the middle. I mean, talk about a trinity. It's magic. Magic. I think his heart attack was just after Mother had arrived. Actually, because it was somebody's birthday. So we had a birthday cake. I think it was somebody called Greater Valentine. She used to live. It was a little chalet. I don't know if you can remember it. Before, then became an office. Before the tent and things were put out, little chalet and that piece of concrete there. That was Greta's little house. And I think it was her birthday. And Gila had made her. Gita was famous for cakes. She had made her a black forest gâteau with an awful lot of cream. Cream inside, cream on top. I mean, and I think more cream added. It was a lot of cream. Anyway, that afternoon the cake was cut, and Guru had a jolly good slice of this cake, I remember. And there was still half the cake left. It was a huge cake. And he said, "Come on, Gila, old girl, cut me another one." And I remember saying, "Guru, you're not planning a second slice of that." And he turned to me and he said, "Better to die having had the second slice than to die dreaming of it." I'll never forget those words. That night, the heart attack. That night. I think that heart attack was probably, all the years I was here, it was probably my most, I was very close to panicking. You know, no matter how much training and how much experience, when you see someone having a heart attack in front of you, he didn't realize what was going on to begin with. It was a terrible backache, terrible in his back, and then it developed into vomiting, and then the pain went round into his chest. And it was 2 in the morning. All the cake came up and everything else. Poor Guru. And he said, it's my heart. Get me to hospital. Tell them I'm coming, he said. Tell them I'm coming, get me to hospital. So I ran. We didn't have a telephone, but Greta fortunately had a little telephone in her. So I ran round to Greta and said, Greta, please call West Wales General. There's a heart attack case coming in. I got Guru to the car, still with a bucket because he was chucking up all the time, in a lot of pain. And I rammed it into gear. In those days, it was just a field, the top here. There wasn't a road out. Luckily, it was summertime, so it was fairly dry. Otherwise, it was a problem to get across that field. Full of rabbits. And all Guru did, he held my arm and he said, whatever you do, don't hit a rabbit. Please don't hit a rabbit. I said, okay, Guru, I'll try not to hit a rabbit, but just you keep that bucket under your head. So I avoided rabbits, got to the top. I didn't bother to close the gates. I don't think there were cattle in the field anyway. Shot out onto the top lane. More rabbits everywhere. And he kept saying, please, you can't kill a rabbit. I may be dying, but you're not allowed to kill a rabbit. I think I got to Glangwili in under 10 minutes. I mean, it was a very fast journey. Unfortunately, Greta had made the call, and as we arrived, there was a wonderful image of a very stout matron with a wheelchair and a couple of orderlies next to her, there under the canopy, just waiting. Opened the door. She put Guru in the chair, and she felt his pulse, I think, and then she shouted something to the orderlies, and they pushed his chair at high speed, and I saw her running with a bunch of keys to a cupboard, a locked cupboard, and getting something out. And on the move, she was filling a syringe. And they were really, I mean, it was fantastic. And they injected him, I mean, within 2 minutes of arrival of something that was obviously crucially important to try and stabilize his heart, which was doing awful things. And we were in the middle of the Shiva. We'd started the Shiva festival. Or it was the very first day of the Shiva. Because I had to get back at 5 a.m. to do the first Abhishekam. I mean, this was a night I'll never forget. What a night. And so I had to leave Guru. I mean, there was nothing I could do anyway at this point. He was being put under a lot of sedation and monitors and things everywhere in intensive care. To come back to do the puja, because the whole community the word spread, particularly bad news. Everybody knew. I guess in the night someone ran down. There was we had an old army field telephone that sort of you had to crank it and you could communicate between here and down below what had happened. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, Swami Kamala, I think, had encouraged everyone to go into the temple and chant. I can't quite remember that, but I think there was a bit of a vigil going on. But anyway, we did the Shiva Puja. And then I rushed back in. And this went on, this sort of slightly bipolar existence between the intensive care in Glangwili and the festival. For, how long was Guru in intensive care? Probably a week, close to a week. But he clearly wasn't going to die. I mean, after 3 days, I think they said, it was touch and go, but then after 3 days they said they thought he would be stable. He got peritonitis, which is a common byproduct of a heart attack, a terrible thing, in a lot of pain. He was in a lot of pain around his heart area, but they could control that with drugs. And while he was there, which is why the mother connection, of course he had nothing to do with the temple with him. They wouldn't, all his things he used to wear, he had taken off and given to me on arrival, I think, or before he'd left here. because they don't, in hospitals, you're not allowed to wear jewelry of any sort. Yeah, all those things. He had nothing. But when I went to see him, he'd often be sitting there with his eyes closed, telling his beads, all imaginary beads, he would chant, a lot of chanting, and he would describe later how through chanting and the whole period of the heart going completely crazy, his mind was able to somehow keep a limit on the amount of racing the heart was doing. He was able to slow it back, just to keep it within the bounds of okay.
Right.
This is before he was given very powerful sedation. And very shortly afterwards, in intensive care, Divine Mother came to visit him. So on top of the heart attack, he started to get all this Shakti there, which of course the hospital staff didn't know what that was. And she appeared, I remember him telling us, in the form of a bumblebee, which he'd never heard of this before, but it turns out that this is one of her manifestations, an enormous bee, huge, great, buzzing bumblebee, coming straight through the big windows into intensive care and just going straight into his body. And then coming all this Shakti. And I think in a funny way that for him also was wonderful reassurance that she hadn't left him, she hadn't abandoned him, she was still there, and this was just part of the drama of life. There was a man in the bed next to him who was very, very sick and clearly wasn't expected to live, and was very frightened. And Guru, as Guru always did, befriended everybody, and he took a lot of time and care and concern over this poor man. Nobody came to see him. The period Guru was there, which is probably about a week, something like that. And Guru just saw how there was such a need for a better place and a better way of caring for somebody who was terribly ill and about to die. He didn't need much, this man, except somebody just to be with him, somebody to hold his hand, to reassure him, to take away his fear, to be a companion through that transition from this birth to the next. And it profoundly moved Guru to see how it wasn't a criticism of West Wales General Hospital, but just how in our society we weren't spending enough time and effort and focus on the needs of people when they came to the end of this span of life. And because of this poor man who did then die, I think about 4 days later, died in the night. He was always calling the nurses, and the nurses hadn't time. They could come and administer, but they couldn't really comfort him. They hadn't the time. Just wasn't the time to sit with him, and he had no relatives. And that gave Guru, it saddened Guru a lot, and it gave him this thought, this sort of seed of resolve and determination that there had to be a better way to die, and that he would do something about it. He just thought this was something Skanda Vale could help with. After We Cared for Life, we looked after people anyway. We certainly didn't have facilities to care for terminally sick people, but that often the case with Guru, he knew that the nuts and bolts would follow. That was sort of detailed. The main thing is to have a resolve to achieve something to begin with. And if that resolve is there and that determination is there, and so long as your resolve is part of divine will and doesn't go against divine will, it'll happen. Time wasn't necessarily the issue, but it was the starting point of the whole hospice concept. He made an incredibly fast recovery to the extent that the last day of the festival, the full moon of Shiva festival, Guru Purnima, he discharged himself from hospital, he wasn't in intensive care, he was in one of those observation units next to intensive care. But he'd persuaded them that he was fine. They made him go off in a wheelchair, which is common practice, just to get to the car. Then I brought him home, and he said, no, it's Guru Purnima. I'll just go down and show my face. And I said, Guru, I was quite cross. I said, Guru, really, you've just come out of hospital. You've just had a heart. If you're not going to lie in bed, I mean, you're supposed to. You promised them you'd spend a month. The deal was you'd spend a month in bed at home, and so it would be the same thing. And the doctor could come and visit. Not a bit of it. He put on his robes. There's photographs of it. Beautiful golden robes. Appears as if nothing's happened. Sits on a chair like this. Huge puja to the Pada puja. Garland after garland. Blessing everybody. And some devotees never knew. He didn't breathe a word.
So there was no surgery. He just kind of basically.
No surgery, no operation.
So he healed himself, really.
His mind certainly. That first, I don't know, 5 or 6 hours. His mind absolutely kept his heart race within the bounds of the possible.
Right.
But it was so touch and go. And funnily enough, that was the time, of all things, of all aspects, when I developed such a love for Ganesh. We had a beautiful Murti Ganesh in the shrine, and I hadn't got such a rapport with Mother at that stage. She was still too powerful and, in a way, almost too scary, because I could see what she was doing with Guru's body, and I did not want that. Although sometimes those experiences would spill off his bed onto my mattress. Oi, oi, oi. Really very strong, powerful experience. But with the whole heart attack thing, I developed such a love and rapport for Ganesh, and I would appeal to him to care and look after and heal Guru and the community, to look off. I mean, after all, who was going to look after us, Ganesh, if he goes? And I've never lost from that moment this love for Ganesh. So for me, that was also a huge step. And he would appear, and I mean, he became such a reality in my life. I have to tell you that the staff in hospital absolutely loved him. I mean, they were very sad when he discharged himself. And in fact, he had sort of aftercare, so he would come back quite regularly. And they loved it when he arrived. He was so polite, he was so sweet, he was so funny. And he would just change the sort of atmosphere in the rooms whenever he arrived. And they gave him the tip about something called Greek yogurt, which he'd never heard of before. Didn't really think much of yogurt, I have to say, prior to that. But Greek yogurt, thankfully, was quite a good substitute. It had the richness of cream without the calories and all that high input. Oh. So he was allowed cakes with cream, with Greek yogurt on top. And I was terrible. I was really supervising. If people brought cakes with... Guru got quite cross. We had heated moments. But I mean, he had to... I sort of said, Guru, look, you have to do it for us. We need you. What would we have done? Oh, you would have survived it. Don't worry, you would have survived. He was very matter of fact. I remember once an experience I had during this period, lying on my mattress next to him in the night. My breathing had stopped. It was very odd. I was obviously having the most beautiful experience. Can't quite remember now what it was. But at some point, this beautiful image came. It was a sort of yogi figure with long hair, matted, going up and up and up and up and up, like a river. And he said in, interestingly, very nice English. So this ancient, whoever he was, said, "Don't you think it's time you took a little breath?" In a very sort of casual way with his finger. And I said, "Oh yeah, okay." And then I woke up taking a breath as if I'd been, you know that feeling if you go down to the bottom of a swimming pool and you're trying to get something like a coin and you can't quite get it, you can't quite catch it, and you finally grab it and then you have to kick the bottom of the pool to get your head up because you're desperate to breathe. It was that sort of feeling of air. And I thought to myself, my gosh, what was all that about? And I'm convinced I was within a whisker of not having that breath. And I remember, this is apropos of Guru and his matter of fact, I remember in the morning when time for his morning coffee to go down to the bed, I said, you'll never guess what happened to me last night, Guru. I nearly died. Thankfully somebody told me to come and have a breath. And he said, oh, you bloody fool. Imagine, you like dying, what am I going to tell the police? That's all he said. You bloody fool. Imagine what would I tell the police? So matter of fact. I had a few experiences, near-death experiences in and around Guru. There was one I remember. Oh dear, I was the only person who was allowed to use the chainsaw, I remember. I was considered responsible. Big mistake. But, we were pruning a tree. In fact, I could still see the branch, the truncated branch, just on the end of what was a little pond just here. And Guru had asked for some time for that branch to come. It was very low and it was coming across the road. It was taking an awful lot of light, and he wanted this tree to be sort of coppiced in a way, but that particular branch had to go. So I said, well, I'd do it. Never a good idea to climb a tree with a chainsaw, but anyway, I did. Up a ladder, and it wasn't a difficult cut. What I hadn't seen was the branch was leaning out, had a secondary, not a particularly big branch, but a second branch was going up and back. There was a lot of foliage, up quite a long way up behind me. Cutting from underneath first and then from on top. Clear cut, no one was coming. Made the cut, and at that moment, as it was falling down, this branch that was behind whacked me on the back of the neck and knocked my head down onto the chain as I let go of the trigger. So I hit the chain as it stopped. Right there. Tiny nick, because the chain was so sharp. But, I mean, that was... If I hadn't let go of the... Because I'd made the cut when I did. Wow. And I was stuck. This thing was on my head, head against it. The chain was still popping. My finger was on the trigger, but released. But I was looking out through the foliage, and there was Guru standing there. His arms behind his back with a sweet smile on his face. Ah, never forgotten. And he said, that was silly, wasn't it? And I said, yes, Guru, I'll never do it again. In fact, I'll never go up a tree with a chainsaw again. Should have done it from the ground. But, I mean, he must have been taking such a careful eye. Something must have just inspired him. People will tell you, he used to just suddenly appear, on building sites and things. Not expected, and suddenly Guru would be there, and whatever was about to, or could have, or might have, because we were using tractors, and we were often tired because we've been working long hours and puja time and this, that, and the other, and his presence would just appear, and then people's minds would be focused, and what might have happened didn't then happen. This was a classic example of that. Just his little face smiling through the branches of this tree. With the thing still running. Just to show, just a tiny bead of blood there. Oy, oy, oy. Yeah. No, he was here, there, and everywhere. Looking after, coaching. But, gosh, he did a good job. Very good job. Wonderful job.